My mom destroyed every relationship I had because they felt too familiar, so I shattered her recovery. She said my boyfriend smiled like her ex. She said my best friend talked like her sister. So she pushed them all away every single time, then she cried to her therapist about being abandoned. But when I told the truth, her support system collapsed. And I didn't feel guilty. I used to believe my mom had good instincts. She could read people, she'd say, spot trouble before it started. So when she said Lisa had the eyes of someone who lies, I believed her. When she said Darren felt off and warned me to stay cautious, I listened. I thought I was being protected. I thought she was looking out for me. But I was 29 when I looked around and realized I was alone. No best friend, no boyfriend, no one left from before. And my mom, she had a dozen phone numbers in her favorites and a therapist who called her a survivor. I didn't even know what she'd told them about me, only that something wasn't right. The first time I really questioned it was a Friday. I'd just started seeing someone, Jay. He was sweet, quiet, worked in IT, no red flags. We'd been dating 3 weeks when I brought him to dinner. My mom smiled through the meal, polite, engaged. Then right before dessert, she leaned toward him and said, "You remind me of my ex-husband." That same little smirk. Jay laughed it off. I did too, but he never came back. A week later, he stopped answering. I thought I'd messed something up, until I found out she'd messaged him. Told him I had attachment issues. Said I was trying to repeat her mistakes. She even told him I was prone to jealousy. I confronted her. She said she was just being honest and trying to save me pain. Then she cried, said it triggered her trauma to see me dating someone who mirrored her past. I didn't know what to say. That was the first crack. But it wasn't the last. Over the next year, I pieced things together. A high school friend blocked me after coming over for dinner. An old roommate ghosted me after a weekend visit. Always after they'd met her. Always after some quiet moment I couldn't remember. I tried asking her. She'd shrug. People come and go. But there was always something smug in her voice when she said it. Like she knew exactly why they left. I started reaching out to people, carefully, casually, testing the waters. And one by one, the stories unfolded. My mom had told Lisa I was emotionally unstable. She told my college roommate I was addicted to validation and used people. She told Darren I had intimacy issues and didn't know how to love. And worst of all, she told them I'd been the one to ruin her life, that every mistake she made was because she'd been busy raising a daughter who drained her. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor, reading the messages Lisa forwarded me, my hands shaking. It wasn't protectiveness, it was sabotage. But the question was, why that answer took longer. I started therapy myself, quietly. I didn't tell my mom, and that's when the real picture started forming. My therapist asked questions no one ever had. Like, what did your mom get out of your pain, and why do you think she felt threatened by your joy? It was subtle, but it was there. Every time I succeeded, she got smaller. Every time I was loved, she unraveled a little. And every time someone got too close to seeing me clearly, she intervened, because if they saw me, really saw me, they'd start asking questions about her, about what she'd done. And she couldn't have that. She built her identity around being the survivor, the one who clawed her way out of darkness. But what if she hadn't? What if she had been the darkness all along? I started testing it, slowly. I rebuilt contact with Darren, with Lisa, carefully. I let them speak, let them tell me what they remembered. And it was all the same pattern, my mom inserting herself, creating tension, whispering things that didn't match reality. She'd twist facts, plant doubts, then step back and let it collapse. And she always came out looking like the wounded mother, the martyr, the concerned parent. Meanwhile, I was the unstable daughter with too many problems to keep a friend. I kept going to therapy, kept digging, and then one day it hit me. She wasn't just manipulating others. She'd been manipulating me too. Every time I doubted myself, it echoed something she'd said. Every time I pulled away from someone, it was because she'd planted fear. I wasn't just isolated. I was programmed to believe I was the problem. And she needed that. Because if I healed, if I built a life full of love and connection, her narrative fell apart. She wasn't a victim. She was just a woman who tore her own daughter down so she'd never have to face the truth. I could have confronted her, could have yelled, but I didn't. Instead, I waited. She loved talking about her therapy, bragging about her breakthroughs. So I booked a session with the same therapist. Just one. I told her my side, the messages, the patterns, the people. I wasn't angry. I was calm, measured. I just told the truth. 2 weeks later, my mom stopped mentioning therapy. A month after that, she cried on the phone and said she felt betrayed, said she didn't know who to trust anymore. And for the first time, I didn't comfort her. I let the silence hang. She doesn't know I was the one who shattered it, who showed the truth, but I know. And I'm finally building a life without her shadow over it. One relationship at a time, and this time no one's leaving. She still texts me sometimes, short, brittle messages like "hope you're okay" or "therapy's not the same anymore." Sometimes she pretends nothing ever happened, sending me articles about emotional health or memes she used to share when we were still pretending to be close. But I don't reply, not because I want revenge, not because I want her to hurt. I just finally know the difference between love and control, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. I remember one night, maybe a year before it all broke open, we were sitting on her porch drinking tea. She looked out at the street and said, "You've always made it hard to love you. You push people away." At the time, I believed her. I carried that line for months, thinking I was difficult, that something in me just didn't work right, but now I know she was talking about herself. I made it hard for her to keep her lies straight. I made it hard for her to hold the center of attention. I made it hard for her to keep playing victim when I kept trying to heal. And healing, real healing, doesn't need an audience. After her therapist dropped her, I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Lisa was the first. She messaged me out of the blue saying, "I don't know what changed, but I'm sorry. I believed things I shouldn't have." We talked for hours. She told me how strange my mom always made her feel. How she'd say things like, "You don't know the real her," or "She's good at pretending." Darren reached out a few weeks later. He didn't even need an explanation. He just said, "I should have trusted you, not a woman I barely knew." That one stung, not because he said it, but because it proved what I'd suspected. My mom didn't need much to turn people against me. Just a few words, a knowing look, and silence. Silence was her sharpest tool. If she didn't like someone, she wouldn't fight them. She'd simply withdraw, make them feel unwelcome, let the discomfort rot the connection. And when I asked why they stopped showing up, she'd shrug and say, "Maybe they saw something you didn't." I started journaling everything. Not out of paranoia, but because I needed to hold on to reality. When someone manipulates the narrative long enough, you start forgetting the facts. You forget what was said and start remembering how they made you feel. Confused, small, ashamed. My journal became the anchor. Every incident, every lie, every gut feeling I'd pushed down. I wrote it all. And the more I wrote, the clearer it became. She'd never been trying to protect me. She was protecting her story. The one where she'd suffered more than anyone else. Where she was the misunderstood parent of a difficult daughter. The one where her trauma gave her license to trespass. And when I stopped letting her, she unraveled. But she didn't do it loudly. That's the thing about women like her. They implode with grace. She told her friends I'd distanced myself. Told her church group I was working through some issues. She never admitted what really happened. That someone finally saw through the cracks and pulled the mask off. I've never told anyone else about the therapy session. Not even Lisa or Darren. It felt like something sacred. Not a revenge plot, just a reckoning. A single moment of truth dropped into years of deception. And that one moment was enough. I still wonder what she told that therapist, how she spun the years, what she left out. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because I'm not living inside her version of the story. I'm writing my own, and I've learned to spot the signs, the subtle critiques wrapped in compliments, the passive-aggressive silence, the sudden warmth followed by cold withdrawal. I see it now. I see her patterns in other people too, in coworkers, in dates, even in myself. That's the hardest part, realizing how much of her lives inside me. The reflex to apologize when I haven't done anything wrong. The instinct to shrink when someone's upset. The way I over-explain just to avoid being misunderstood. That's her legacy, and I'm entangling it piece by piece, one honest conversation at a time, one real connection. I'm not perfect. I still flinch when someone raises their voice. I still question my own memory more than I should, but I don't carry her guilt anymore. And I don't need her approval to feel whole. A few months ago, I ran into her at the grocery store. Total accident. She looked older, smaller. She smiled like nothing had happened and said, "It's been too long." I nodded, said, "It has." Then she reached for my arm and asked, "So who are you seeing these days?" I smiled. Not cruelly, just knowingly. And I said, "Someone who doesn't remind you of anyone." I walked away before she could answer. I didn't look back. She doesn't get to narrate my life anymore. A week after that grocery store run-in, she sent me a long message. 3 paragraphs. She said she was in a reflective place, said she'd been working through layers of pain, that she'd been misunderstood her whole life and had never meant to hurt me. She mentioned the word forgiveness 5 times. Not once did she apologize. Not once did she name what she'd done. It was all shadows, vague references to the past, mistakes, distance, and cycles. I stared at that message for over an hour. My hands were cold. Not from sadness, not even from anger, just cold. Like my body already knew what I needed to do. I didn't reply. I archived the message. That silence, mine, wasn't passive. It was a boundary she wasn't used to. She had trained me for years to fix things, to absorb blame, make peace, reestablish the connection no matter the cost. But I wasn't that person anymore. And without access to me, her narrative couldn't sustain itself. Her identity, the misunderstood mother of a difficult daughter, began to unravel. Not publicly, quietly. I started hearing about it in sideways ways. A friend of hers asked my aunt why we weren't speaking. Someone at her book club mentioned seeing me and wondering if something had happened. And I knew exactly what she was doing. Playing vague. Letting people assume, but assumptions are fragile. They only hold when no one's looking closely. And people were starting to look. Because my life was getting better, and hers, well, it had lost its main character. Me, without me to react to provoke, to repair. She was just a woman with too many stories that didn't quite line up. I started reconnecting with people, not just the ones she'd driven away, but ones I'd driven away under her influence. I reached out to an old mentor I hadn't spoken to in years. She told me she'd always wondered why I'd disappeared. I reconnected with an ex I'd once loved deeply but pushed away after my mom's whispered warnings. We met for coffee, talked for hours, and when I told him what had really happened, he just stared at me and said, "That makes so much sense now." It was like entangling knots I didn't know were still there. One by one, the old stories collapsed, and underneath them, there was me, not broken, not unlovable, just interrupted. She had interrupted me, my growth, my joy, my connections. And once I saw that, I became protective of myself in a way I'd never been before. Not defensive, just clear. I started dating again, carefully, slowly. And when someone triggered that old urge to self-abandon, I paused. I asked myself, is this me or her voice in my head? And more often than not, it was her. She was still there, like a ghost in my nervous system, but a ghost doesn't get to drive. I do, and that meant something had to shift permanently. The moment came unexpectedly. A woman from her church reached out to me, someone I barely knew. She said she was sorry to intrude, but she'd been counseling my mom through some things and felt like she wasn't getting the full story. She asked if I'd be willing to share my side. I hesitated. It felt like a trap. But then I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I said yes. We met in a park, neutral ground. She was kind, direct. She didn't try to psychoanalyze me. She just listened. I told her the facts. Not to turn her against my mom, but because the truth is stable. And the moment I finished, she said something I'll never forget. She talks a lot about how much pain she's in, but I think you're the only one who's ever asked where it came from. That line echoed in me for days, because she was right. My mom had created so much chaos that no one had ever had the time or distance to ask why. Why did she burn every bridge? Why did she isolate herself under the guise of protection? Why did she need me to suffer to validate her pain? And the answer, as uncomfortable as it was, didn't matter anymore. I wasn't going to fix her. I wasn't going to solve a puzzle she built to keep people spinning. She could keep her story. I was writing a new one. The next time she texted me, it was short. "Hope you're happy. I really do." I didn't respond, I just smiled. Because I was, not perfect. Not fully healed, but happy, in a real way, in a way she couldn't rewrite. And that was the ending she never saw coming. It's funny how silence becomes power when you've spent your life being talked over. I never thought not answering her would feel like reclaiming something, but it did. For the first time, I wasn't scrambling to keep peace or prevent an explosion. I wasn't rehearsing answers or trying to preempt her moods. I was just still. And in that stillness, I started to hear my own voice more clearly. It didn't sound like hers. It didn't sound like guilt or shame. It sounded like mine. Around that time, I started getting closer to someone new. His name was Caleb. We met through work, nothing romantic at first. Just casual conversations at the end of long meetings, shared coffees when no one else stayed late. He was kind, but not in a performative way. He didn't flatter. He just noticed things, when I was quiet, when I seemed off, when I forced a smile. And he didn't push. That alone made him feel different. I remember one night we were walking to the train station after a conference, and he asked if I'd ever had a relationship that felt like safety, not love, not passion, just safety. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say of course, but all I could think about were the strings my mom attached to everything. Her version of love was conditional, always calibrated around her moods. If I was happy, she grew cold. If I was hurt, she was kind, but only until I recovered. Then it reset, and I had repeated that dynamic with so many people, never realizing I was choosing what felt familiar, not what felt right. Caleb didn't remind me of anyone, that was the point, and because of that, I didn't know how to be around him at first. I kept waiting for the twist. The moment he'd turn cold, impatient, critical. But it never came, and slowly my guard started to lower. We started seeing each other outside of work, movies, late-night walks, dinners where we didn't talk about trauma or healing or pain, just life. And it felt peaceful, but I was scared. Not of him, of what it would mean if I let myself have something good. Because for so long, good things had consequences. Joy invited sabotage. Comfort invited control. I had been taught, trained, to be suspicious of calm. One night he looked at me and said, "I don't want to fix you, I just want to know you." And I broke. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but something inside me cracked, and all the noise that used to play on loop, her voice, her judgments, her doubts, went quiet. I let myself fall in love, slowly, honestly, and not just with him, with who I was becoming, a version of myself I didn't recognize but had always hoped existed. That was the most painful part in a way. Realizing how much I'd lost to her, not just relationships, but time, identity, trust in my own instincts. I grieved it quietly, privately, and in that grief, I made a decision. I wrote her a letter, not to send, just to write. I listed everything she'd done, not in anger, in clarity. I wrote down the manipulation, the gaslighting, the way she'd smile in public and unravel me in private. I wrote about the birthdays she ruined, the friendships she poisoned, the lies she told behind my back. I didn't edit myself. I didn't try to sound fair or reasonable. I just told the truth. It took 3 hours. When I finished, I folded it once, slid it into an envelope, and put it in the back of my desk drawer. It's still there. I don't need her to read it. I just needed to know I could say it, that I could name it. Because if you can name it, it can't own you. She still tries to reach out now and then. Holidays, birthdays, messages laced with sweetness but soaked in manipulation. Thinking of you, she writes, or miss you more than you know, but I do know. I know exactly what she misses. She misses control. She misses being the center of gravity. She misses the version of me who orbited around her pain. That version is gone. Not because I hate her. I've learned that hate is just another tether, another way to stay entangled. I don't need her to suffer. I just need her to stop writing the script. My life isn't a stage for her tragedy anymore. Caleb and I moved in together 6 months ago. It was terrifying, not because I didn't trust him, but because a small voice in me still whispered warnings, still waited for the fallout. But it didn't come. He's steady, present. When I get quiet, he doesn't panic. When I cry, he doesn't rush to fix it. He listens. And for the first time, I don't feel like I'm hiding parts of myself to keep someone comfortable. I told him about my mom, about everything. I expected him to flinch, to withdraw, but he didn't. He just held my hand and said, "You didn't deserve that. None of it." And hearing that, really hearing it, undid something in me, because I hadn't just been protecting myself from her. I'd been protecting the world from the truth of her, from the full, unvarnished version. But the more I told it, the more real I felt, the more whole. One truth at a time, I was coming back to myself. A few months after we moved in together, I got a call from an unknown number. I don't usually answer those, but something in me said pick up. The voice on the other end was shaky, older, and oddly familiar. It was my mom's sister, my Aunt Susan. We hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years. Not out of any fight or falling out, but because my mom made it clear she didn't trust her. Said she was dramatic, selfish, always trying to stir up the past. And like with everyone else, I believed her. But now, here she was on the phone, asking if we could meet. She said, "I know I'm probably the last person you expect to hear from, but I've been hearing things. And I think it's time we talk." I agreed. We met at a small diner near the outskirts of the city. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp, alert. She didn't make small talk, just dove straight in. She said she'd seen my mom recently and that she was worried. Said she was unraveling in ways she didn't recognize. She keeps talking about being misunderstood, about everyone abandoning her. But when I ask what happened, she changes the subject or cries. It's like she's rewritten the whole past. But even she can't keep the story straight anymore. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "You know she did the same thing to me, right?" I just stared. I didn't know. I didn't know anything about their relationship beyond what my mom told me. That Susan was unstable, had issues with boundaries, always played the victim. But Susan's version was different, painfully so. She told me about growing up in a household where love was a currency and silence was punishment, where their mother, my grandmother, played them against each other for attention. Where my mom learned early how to perform pain for sympathy and how to turn people into mirrors for her own fractured reflection. I loved her, Susan said, but she only knew how to keep love if it came with control. And suddenly it made sense. The way my mom had twisted my friendships, distorted my romantic relationships, even reshaped the way I saw myself, it wasn't random, it was inherited. Not in the genetic sense, in the behavioral, insidious, generational way. Trauma passed like heirlooms, and I had been the latest vessel. Susan and I talked for hours. She filled in blanks I didn't know were there, stories my mom had either erased or replaced with fiction. I learned that my mom had once had a fiancé who disappeared from her life without warning, that she had sabotaged Susan's chance at a scholarship by telling their parents lies about her, that she'd been spinning narratives since they were teenagers. And yet, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow, like I'd spent my whole life trying to please someone whose pain was deeper and more complex than I could ever fix, and who had made me responsible for it anyway. Susan didn't offer solutions. She wasn't trying to solve my mom. She just wanted me to know the truth. She's sick in a way that's hard to see, but you saw it. You broke the chain. That matters. I went home that night and cried, not because I missed my mom, but because I realized how much of my life had been shaped around her instability, my career choices, my relationships, even my personality, always tiptoeing, always adapting. And now, for the first time, I was free to choose differently. That realization didn't bring joy, not immediately. It brought grief, deep, aching grief, for the years I couldn't get back, for the self I never got to be, for the people I pushed away trying to keep her happy. Caleb held me through it all. He didn't ask me to move on or get over it. He just stayed present, and slowly I began to breathe easier. I reached out to Lisa again, this time not to apologize or explain, but just to talk. As equals, we talked about books, work, travel. It felt normal, grounded. Like maybe I was building something real this time, something she couldn't touch, A few weeks later, I got another message from my mom. This one was different. Shorter, colder. I don't know what you've told people, but they're starting to treat me differently. I hope you're proud of yourself. That message didn't make me agree. It made me sad, because it was proof that even now, after everything, she still thought the truth was something to be ashamed of, something to hide, something dangerous. But the truth had saved me. It had stitched me back together in places I didn't know were torn. And I wasn't going to give that up just to protect her illusion. She had spent her life carefully constructing a version of reality where she was the victim of everyone else's cruelty. But now, people were asking questions. And when the questions came, she had no real answers. Only tears, only silence, only blame. I stopped reading her messages after that. Not out of spite. Just because they weren't for me anymore. They were for the version of me that used to fold at every guilt trip. The version that used to apologize for being hurt. That version was gone. I was different now. And this time the silence wasn't lonely. It was clean. It was mine. 2 months passed without another message. No missed calls, no vague updates through extended family. And then one day, Caleb came home from work holding an envelope. "This was left at the front desk for you," he said. Handing it over. My name was written in delicate cursive across the front, unmistakably hers. My mom never sent emails when she wanted to be heard. She knew letters carried weight. Paper could be held, could linger. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The letter inside was handwritten, 3 pages long. It didn't start with "I'm sorry." It started with "I don't recognize you anymore." She went on to describe how cold I'd become, how distant, how it felt like I'd been poisoned by therapy, by friends who never knew our bond, by lies. She wrote about her suffering, about nights she couldn't sleep, how her chest hurt from the betrayal. She said I had become someone else, and in a way she was right. I had, but not because of betrayal, because of clarity. The letter shifted halfway through. It turned darker. She began listing what she had done for me, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the things she gave up to be my mother. "I know I wasn't perfect," she wrote, "but you were no saint either." And just like that, I remembered why I stopped engaging. Even her pleas were laced with accusations. Even her grief had a knife in its hand. I folded the letter back up, slid it into the drawer with the others. I didn't need to respond. She didn't want resolution. She wanted a reaction. I didn't give her one. A week later, Caleb and I hosted a small dinner at our place. Just a few friends, soft lights, homemade food. I caught myself laughing at one point, really laughing. And I had this strange, unfamiliar thought, I'm safe, not just physically, emotionally. No one in that room wanted to break me down to feel taller. No one was collecting my joy like ammunition. I looked around and realized I had chosen these people. I had built this life, not from obligation, not from guilt, but from choice. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the floor with Caleb and told him about a moment from my childhood I hadn't thought about in years. I was 8. My mom had been in a terrible mood for days. I'd gotten a certificate at school, nothing big, just a silly little award for kindness. I remember being excited to show her. I handed her the paper with both hands. She looked at it, smiled for half a second, and then said, "Must be nice to have people who see you." I didn't understand it then. I thought she was proud, just tired, but now I know what that was. Jealousy, resentment, even my smallest victories felt like betrayals to her. Caleb listened without interrupting when I finished. He didn't say anything right away. He just held my hand and said, "That little girl deserved better." And that broke me in the gentlest way, because I had spent so long trying to convince myself it hadn't been that bad, that she'd tried her best, that I was too sensitive. But no one says that to children unless they're already carrying a weight the child didn't give them. My mom's pain wasn't mine to carry, her story wasn't mine to live inside, and I was finally stepping out of it. A few weeks later, I ran into a woman who used to know my mom, an old family acquaintance who hadn't seen me since I was a teenager. She hugged me tightly, said I looked healthy, happy. Then she paused and said, "Your mom told me you moved away to figure yourself out, said you were going through something, but I can see now, you figured it out just fine." I smiled, not bitterly, not triumphantly, just peacefully, because I had, not perfectly, not all at once, but I was getting there. I still have bad days. Days where I second-guess a text, replay a conversation, wonder if I'm being too much or not enough. But those moments pass now. They don't root. They don't grow. I don't water them like I used to. The garden in my head is quieter, kinder. And when I look back, I don't feel hatred. I feel distance. Necessary distance. The kind that lets you breathe again. The kind that lets you build. That letter she wrote, the last one, is still in the drawer. I think about burning it sometimes. But something stops me. Not out of sentiment, just a strange kind of documentation, a reminder of the world I walked out of the woman who taught me everything by doing the opposite, of the cost of pretending love and control are the same thing. I don't know if she'll ever change, part of me hopes she does, but that hope doesn't keep me tied to her anymore. I've stopped holding my breath for an apology that will never come. I've stopped giving her space in my future just because she occupied so much of my past. I'm building something new now. And this time, it's real. A few months later, something happened I wasn't expecting. Caleb's mother invited me to a weekend retreat, just her and a few women from her family, a quiet cabin up north, no service, no distractions. My first instinct was panic. I didn't know how to be around maternal energy that wasn't laced with criticism or manipulation. But Caleb encouraged me, said his mom really wanted me there, said it would be good to get away. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. Part of me wanted to see what it was like, to be in a space where no one was waiting to twist your words or rewrite your intentions. From the moment we arrived, I felt like I'd stepped into another life. Caleb's mom, Linda, was soft-spoken, observant. She noticed when I looked overwhelmed and changed the subject. She made tea without asking, told stories about her own awkward 20s, and didn't pry. She didn't ask about my mom. She didn't ask about the past. She just welcomed me. There was a moment that first night I'll never forget. We were sitting around the fire pit, wrapped in blankets. Someone had made soup. The conversation turned toward childhood. Light, funny stories, harmless nostalgia. I went quiet. I didn't have those kinds of stories, not the way they did. Linda noticed. She didn't ask questions. She just placed her hand gently on mine and said, "You're safe here, sweetie." I nearly cried, not because of the words, because of the way she said them, as if it was obvious. As if safety wasn't something that had to be earned or negotiated. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling for hours. It was like I was grieving a version of family I never knew existed. Not just grieving it, realizing it had been possible all along. That's what broke me. Not the loss, but the wasted years believing love had to come with pain. I came back from that weekend different, a little softer, a little braver. I started saying no more, not out of defiance, out of clarity. When old guilt would creep in, I'd write it down. When I heard her voice in my head, I'd ask myself if the words belonged to me or to her. And slowly, my own voice started getting louder. I began journaling less about what she did and more about what I wanted. I started imagining a future that didn't revolve around managing someone else's emotions. It felt like standing up after being curled into a ball for too long. Disorienting, painful, but freeing. Around that time, Susan called me again. She said she'd spoken to my mom, that she was in a bad way, isolated, paranoid. She says people are turning on her, that everyone's taking your side. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't have a side. I had the truth. But the truth doesn't care about sides. Susan said, "I think she's starting to realize what she's lost." I asked, "Is she sorry?" There was a long pause. "No," Susan said, "not yet, maybe not ever, but she's unraveling." And the thing is, that didn't bring me any peace. I didn't want her to fall apart. I just wanted her to stop pulling me down with her. For a while, I wondered if I should visit, just once, for closure. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized closure is a myth when the door was never open in the first place. She didn't leave room for reconciliation, just performance. And I wasn't going to step back into the theater, not again. One morning, Caleb found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a picture I hadn't seen in years. It was from when I was 5. I was smiling at the camera, arms wrapped around a teddy bear. My mom was in the background, half turned away, looking somewhere else, somewhere far. Caleb sat next to me and said nothing, just waited. Eventually I said, "I used to think if I could be good enough, she'd turn around, that she'd look at me the way moms are supposed to." He nodded. And now I looked at the photo. Now I know she was never looking away from me. She was looking inward, at her own pain, at her own ghosts. I just happened to be in the room. That realization freed something in me, because for years I thought I'd failed her, failed as a daughter, as a person, but I hadn't. I'd simply been too close to someone who couldn't see beyond themselves, and now that I'd stepped back, I could finally see myself, not as her reflection, but as my own whole, flawed, healing person. That week, I started something new. A small group for women entangling from difficult maternal relationships. Just 5 of us at first. Strangers who shared a specific kind of ache, one that doesn't show on the surface but lives in your bones. We told our stories, we cried, we laughed at things that would have made other people uncomfortable. And for the first time, I felt like I was turning my pain into something useful. Not as a weapon, as a bridge. One woman in the group, Maya, said something that stuck with me. "I used to think my mom was the villain in my story. Now I think she was just the storm. And I'm the house that didn't fall down." I wrote that down. I think about it often. Because that's what it felt like surviving a storm that never quite stopped, but learning to build anyway, stronger, quieter, wiser. Caleb and I took a trip a few weeks later, nothing big, just a cabin upstate. One night, we lit a fire and sat outside wrapped in blankets. I told him, "I think I'm finally ready to say I'm happy." He didn't smile right away. He looked at me for a long time and said, "You didn't say that the whole first year I knew you." "I know," I said, because I didn't believe it could last. And now I think it's up to me, because it is. Happiness isn't something she could give or take away. It was mine all along, hidden under years of fear, obligation, shame. And now that I'd found it, I wasn't letting go. 3 months ago, I heard she was moving, not far, just across town, into a smaller place. A friend of hers mentioned it in passing, said she was downsizing, trying to start over. The same friend said she didn't look well. Said she was thinner, quieter, didn't host book clubs anymore. I didn't ask for more. I didn't want details. because I knew what they were trying to say without saying it. She was fading, not dramatically, just slowly losing the grip she'd kept so tight for so long. Part of me thought I'd feel satisfaction, that twisted sense of justice we secretly hope for when someone who hurt us finally starts to hurt themselves, but I didn't feel anything, just a stillness, like the water had finally stopped churning. There's no revenge in this story. No dramatic confrontation, no final words shouted in the rain, just distance, boundaries, and a quiet understanding that sometimes the best way to win is simply to walk away and build a life that doesn't include them. I kept the last message she ever sent. It came late one night, 2:11 a.m. Just one line, "You'll understand when you have a daughter." I didn't reply, not because it wasn't worth replying to, but because it wasn't meant for me. That message was for herself, a lifeline to her own narrative, her last thread of control. I left it there unanswered, and I closed the door. I don't know if I'll ever have children, but if I do, I know exactly what kind of mother I won't be. I won't ask them to carry my pain. I won't punish them for being whole when I never learned how to be. I won't confuse closeness with control or guilt with guidance. And if one day they hand me a certificate from school with joy in their eyes, I won't say something that poisons that moment. I'll tell them I'm proud. Not because they earned it, but because they exist, because that's what I spent most of my life aching to hear. And now that I understand how deep that ache runs, I refuse to pass it down. Caleb and I got engaged last month. Nothing flashy, just a quiet afternoon in the garden behind our apartment, a ring he picked because he said it looked like something I'd wear even before I ever wore it. I said yes without hesitation. And for the first time in my life, the voice in my head didn't whisper warnings. It stayed quiet, at peace. We're planning something small. No guest list full of obligation, just the people who have stood beside me in the light and the dark, the people who never asked me to shrink, the ones who met me where I was and stayed, my chosen family, my real family. I haven't told most of them the full story. They know pieces, enough to understand the gaps, but not everything, not the way she used silence like a blade, not the way she'd smile sweetly in public and then spend the ride home explaining how I'd embarrassed her. Not the way she'd rewrite memories to make herself the victim no matter what actually happened. Some of it still lives only in my journal, in the late-night scribbles and early morning realizations, in the pages where I finally started using my own language instead of hers. And that's okay. Some stories are meant to be witnessed quietly. Some are only for the people who lived them. I still get questions sometimes, from cousins, old neighbors, people who don't know the whole truth. They ask if I talk to her. They say things like she must miss you or family's complicated. And I just smile and say, yeah, it is. Because I don't owe anyone the truth. I lived it. I survived it. And I'm still here. Sometimes I walk past the old neighborhood just to see it, not to visit, just to remind myself how far I've come. The house looks smaller now. The curtains are always drawn. The porch light doesn't come on anymore. It used to be the center of my world. Now it's just another place I used to know. I don't stop. I keep walking. Past the park where I used to sit and cry into my scarf after another fight. Past the corner where she told me I was lucky to have her because no one else would ever put up with me. Past the street where I finally turned my phone off and decided I wasn't going back. I keep walking because every step forward is mine, not borrowed, not negotiated, not dependent on her approval, just mine. It shows up when you finally understand that what happened to you wasn't your fault, and who you've become is entirely your own.